My name is David Adès. I'm a poet based in Sydney and the host of this monthly poetry podcast reading series called Poets Corner in association with WestWords in Parramatta in Sydney's West. WestWords is Western Sydney's literature development organisation. Poets Corner is part of WestWords' public programming that celebrates the richness, diversity and insight that literature offers. Especially in these times, we thank the ongoing support of Create New South Wales, the Cultural Fund of Copyright Australia, City of Parramatta Council, Blacktown City Council and Campbelltown City Council, as well as the many project partners that have enabled us to continue to provide opportunities to writers and audiences. We hope that this new world, I'm not sure what we mean when we say new world, because it seems to be just ever-changingly different and challenging, but will see us sharing and a closeness of spirit. Each month, I invite a poet to read poems and talk about them around a theme of the poet's choice. Our guest poet today is Judith Beveridge, who will be reading poems from and talking with me on the theme of how poetry summons us into the sacred. But first, as is my custom, an acknowledgement of country. I'm recording this from Beecroft in Sydney. Judith is recording also from Sydney. I would like to pay my respects to and acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging of the Wallamita people, the traditional custodians of the land in Beecroft, and of the Wallamadigal people, which I think is another name for the same tribe, the traditional owners of the land from which Judith is recording, and to acknowledge also that they are the sovereign owners of their land, which has never been ceded or given up. And Judith has given me a very short bio note. There's a lot more to it than what I'm going to read to you, but this is it. Judith Beveridge has published 8 books of poetry, most recently Tintinnabulum with Giramondo Publishing in 2024. She was poetry editor of Meanjin for 10 years and taught poetry writing for 16 years at postgraduate level at the University of Sydney. Her books have won major prizes, including the 2019 Prime Minister's Award for Poetry for Sun Music, New and Selected Poems. She's been awarded the Philip Hodgins Memorial Medal and the Christopher Brennan Award for Excellence in Literature. She has edited many anthologies, including Contemporary Australian Poetry with Puncher and Watman in 2016. Her work has been studied in schools and universities and has been translated into many languages. And she lives in Sydney. Hello, Judith, and welcome to Poets Corner.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's so exciting because we had you back in the day in the live readings, the second live reading in 2018. So it's lovely to get a chance to have you on this platform too. I want to start by unpicking your theme a bit. First, I want to ask you about your use of the word sacred as part of your theme. As a poet, you're an observer and a chronicler. And to me, that often involves, a search for clarity, meaning, truth, and so on. Do you approach your task as a poet as itself in some way sacred?
A lovely question to start, David. Thank you. Look, I do, I think, actually. I mean, I've always held poetry and all the arts really in very high regard because I think they're the means and mechanisms through which we do uncover something very special about human existence. And those things that are away really from the mundane. I think art helps us to find those truths that elevate us and that speak to our humanity in ways that are enriching and rewarding. So yes, I do hold poetry and the task of being a poet in high regard.
Mm. Sacred is a word that is loaded with a specifically religious meaning. Dictionary definitions of the word refer to it as meaning connected with God or a god or dedicated to religious purpose and so deserving veneration. Does your use of that word as part of your theme have this religious context in mind, or is it more focused on the idea of veneration or reverence?
Yes, I think the latter really, David. I mean, sacred is, as you say, a very charged word. And by sacred, I think I mean what I was just talking about a minute ago. Um, the nature of life that enriches us and keeps us in touch, with ideas and values that help us live in ways that are beneficial. And I think it's art and writing that does this more than any other um, uh, pursuit, really. Um, I think religion can be a little bit inflexible, perhaps. So I wouldn't want to just limit the word sacred to some sort of religious notion. I think for me it's much wider than that, and it's got to do with things like relationship and finding connection between things, finding the underlying um, thing that things have in common, trying to look at the world not in a way that suggests sort of separation and disparate things, but in a way that reveals connection.
Hmm. As I mentioned back in March 2018, you did a live reading as part of the forerunner to this podcast series. And the theme you had at that time was poetry as wonder. It seems to me that your theme today is linked to and is perhaps an extension or evolution of that theme. Can you say something about how your thinking on these themes has evolved since 2018?
Uh, it's probably pretty much stayed the same. I think, David, I think, wonder is a great quality to try and cultivate, because, there's so much out there that can really be very depressing and sap our energies. And I think wonder is one of those things that does energize us and keeps us grounded in what's good about the world and people and things like that. And I think poetry has a great ability to open up wonder for readers, in the way that poets often look afresh at things and try to find something miraculous, perhaps in the ordinary. And I think that's a very important thing to do. I think, again, it's an enriching thing to do. I kind of think poetry, generally speaking, has a kind of remedial effect, or at least I want it to.
Mm.
That when somebody reads a poem, it's opened up something within them that, I don't know, just helps them understand something or deal with a certain emotion. So a kind of cathartic um, aspect, I suppose. And
And
I
I
think
suppose,
wonder can do that.
if a reader is gravitating towards reading a poem, they're looking for something. They're looking for the poem to open up something within them, aren't they?
That's true, I think. Yes, I think people go to poetry, for solace often, for comfort, for a sense of, shared feeling. I think that's one of its sort of, virtues, that kind of communal nature that the poem can provide.
And maybe also for revelation, for ways of looking at the world that they hadn't thought of. And
Yes, also that's right. And also for um, highlighting the wonder of language. I think, poetry is
oh,
the
yeah.
art form that does that, most spectacularly. And I mean, when you think about it, language is an absolutely wonderful thing, and it's in the poem, it's in poetry where we get, language at its most heightened, its most beguiling, its most seductive. And I think, people just fall in love with language often after they've read poetry. It does that to you.
Well, we'll be talking about language later on because I'm going to be talking to you about the language in some of the poems you're going to be reading. But before that, a couple more sort of introductory questions. I suppose the obvious next question for me, stemming from your theme, which I'm sure we'll explore more as we discuss your poems, is how does poetry summons us into the sacred? What is it about poetry that does this?
Well, probably quite a few aspects about it, and I should say that not all poems open us up to the sacred.
No.
Poems do different things and have different intentions, but um, I think again, it's for me, it's opening the world up, and revealing relationships perhaps that might be, I don't know, lost or forgotten. And I think similes and metaphors, the image can do this wonderfully well. And it can just open our minds and hearts in a way that makes us receptive. Also, I think poetry is very much related to the breath. Um, because when you're reading and writing a poem, it's actually a bodily experience. You're reading with your eyes, you're understanding with your brain, you're using your voice or your breath to take the words into you. And I think there's a very visceral connection. And um, I think the devices of poetry too, like repetition, sound, as I said earlier, imagery. I think it's Edward Hirsch who says that repetition opens up the intellect for reverie. I think that's really lovely. And when we look at the sort of history of how poetry originated, it originated as a kind of spiritual thing, through dance, through prayer, through chanting. So it's always had this ability, I think, to go deeply beyond just meaning. Um, I think there's something about poetic language, particularly sound, that opens up areas that other forms of literature may not do.
Mm. And what do you think happens, Judith, when poetry summons us into the sacred? How are we affected or changed by this when it happens?
Well, I guess, well, hopefully we see things differently. I think it's Don Patterson who says that, once a poem has kind of entered into somebody, that reader is different somehow because of its techniques, because of the forceful and often insidious way that a poem, might enter into you. It changes something, I think, about the way that you see the world. Now, that may not necessarily be lasting, but for that moment, it does have an effect, I think. Yeah, so I think we become opened up, as I said. I think we become receptive. I think we also can become quieter because I think when you read a poem, it does kind of still the mind. I think because you often mull over something or you read it again, or you have to be in a certain receptive state, I think, to take poetry in. And for me, part of sacredness is about that quietness of being, um, of just, sitting with a poem and letting it work on you rather than, you interfering with it.
So being immersed in the moment, being reflective, contemplative, all those things.
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely.
Shall we reflect on a poem? Shall we read a poem?
Yes, okay. Shall I read The Man Washing? Is that
Yes,
the first one, David? Yes,
yes, that is.
okay. All right. So this one's called Man Washing on a Railway Platform Outside Delhi, and it was something I witnessed some years ago when I was on a train, and the train had just sort of pulled just a little bit out of the station at Delhi. It hadn't fully gone into the platform, and I was just watching this man use the tap on the railway station to wash himself, and it was just I was just so moved by by watching him, and I guess the context around it, because it meant obviously that he didn't have access to a tap where he was living. So, the idea of poverty and that sort of thing came into it. So I'll read the poem. Man washing on a railway platform outside Delhi. It's the way he stands, nearly naked in the winter sun, turning on and off the railway station tap. I have seen people look less reverent tuning Mozart. I have seen hands give coins to beggars appear nonchalant compared to the way his hands give this water to his body. Don't tell me this is a man released for a moment out of poverty, a man who wants the penance of each cold drop, a man who wants the smell of his neighbours to vanish from his skin, who wants to taste what is beyond the scum and effluent of the village ditch. And don't tell me each drop he takes to glisten his body will never be neutral, though he holds each clear spill with equality. It isn't just the water, It's the way his hands take the water from the tap to his body. It's the way he attends each pour. It's the way he decants the water back and forth, as if receiving instruction for the repetition of the names of God. And it's the way he knows his poverty without privacy, and the way, though the water is free, he takes careful liters.
So following on from that sort of introductory discussion we had, this poem invokes both reverence and God. There's reverence here on several levels. There's the reverence of the man himself and the way he washes on the railway platform. And there is the reverence of the narrator poet observing that reverence, isn't there? I mean,
Yes.
both are in a way enshrined, if you like, by a sort of sense of reverence, although he may not consciously be feeling that, but he's enacting it.
That's right. I mean, the whole scene was so dignified. He wasn't rushing. He was taking his time. He didn't mind that he was out in public, and stripped almost bare. And it seemed to me that he was performing this act of washing with a huge amount of reverence. And I think in India, I think the one's ablutions are a reverential act often. They're for a kind of purification. Therefore, they have often a religious or sacred purpose to it. And I felt very much that that was what I was witnessing. And that the fact that he didn't have his own tap wasn't the issue. He would have performed this ablution the same no matter where the tap stood. And I just thought there was something incredibly moving and absolutely beautiful about what I was witnessing.
It's very easy, and we probably all do it every day, to walk past and not notice that. And
Yes.
that's, I mean, I think everyone has a poetic eye, but that's the poetic eye suddenly thinking, "Oops, this is something I need to take notice of."
Yes, and I was lucky that the train stopped. I mean, had the train sort of pulled in fully to the station, I wouldn't have seen this. So, sometimes it's a chance moment or a chance occurrence that, that just seems to hold your attention. So, um, yeah, yeah. And it was, I didn't write the poem straight away. Can't really remember how much time elapsed, probably a few months, but as I was recalling what I witnessed, then I began to think about the whole scene in much more depth, I think. Whereas, just when it was occurring, I probably just, at some level, just watched. And then later, when I really began to think and remember the scene, it came back, sort of fully charged, if you like. And I find that that's often the way I write, that I need some time often between what I've seen or experienced and the writing of it. I think it
I
was
think
well
that's right.
esteemed.
Poetry, you have the moment, and then you have the gestation of that moment,
Yes,
and a
that's
lot of
right.
that happens without you even noticing that it happens, and then several months later, oh, I
Yes,
need to write a poem about this, and then
that's right. It's been sitting there in your nervous system and it's ready to come out at some
mm,
point. Yes,
mm.
that's right.
So the observer in the poem, which is you, is an outsider and an onlooker. Well, whatever views the narrator brings with her to this moment, the poem seeks to be non-judgmental, to be praiseworthy, to raise the moment from being unnoticed to being noticed, and in giving it notice, to give it humanity and worthiness. Is that the task of this poem? Is that, if you like, its sacred duty?
Oh, I think absolutely, David. I think you've put that really nicely and harking back to my theme, I think this is one of my poems which does try to reveal sacred moments, and to find a language for that. Yeah, absolutely. I just tried to get across my own humility too, I think, in witnessing the man. Yeah.
Well, we've touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to explore a bit further. On one level, you could say that this is just a man washing himself on a railway platform and nothing more. Do the man's actions and how he goes about them, and you've touched on this, contain within it this reverence, or is that something that comes from your perception of an attribution to those?
Yeah. Very good question, Dave. Well, I think probably both. I really there was something absolutely um, essential in the way that he was doing it. As I said, he wasn't rushing. Um, there was no sense of shame or embarrassment. He was performing this as an act of reverence.
In a ritualistic way?
Not necessarily ritualistic, but as if he took it really seriously, not like we do, we rush in and out of the shower in, half a minute or something. And we don't really always think about what we're doing or why we're actually washing ourselves.
Mm.
But this did seem to have some sense of that it was a kind of sacred act, that it wasn't just a sort of routine thing of going to the tap each day, that there was some sense of the sacred behind it.
Mm. Um, Other words don't tell me in the poem, and then you repeated them later, and don't tell me, an admonition by the narrator to an internal dialogue or to external voices?
Um, I think it's probably the narrator's voice trying to counter any thoughts that he's doing this because he's poor.
Mm.
Um, the essential experience, I think, was he's doing it because he values the act of washing himself, the act of purification.
Mm.
And that seemed to me uh, the, the most essential thing about what I was witnessing. Obviously, he was there at the tap because he was poor and he didn't have a tap he could use himself. But in a sense, that almost seemed not irrelevant because, of course, it's awful when people don't have access to resources. But I just took away from it the reverence that he displayed. Now, I know some people would probably maybe criticize me for downplaying, the economic circumstances because they are terrible in places like India. People have virtually nothing. But it doesn't mean they don't have a kind of spiritual richness to them. Uh, so that's the kind of thing I think I wanted to bring out in the poem, that you don't
I
have
mean,
to, you can still, even though you don't have much material um, advantage, you can still, find the sacred.
and what you're saying really is that there's dignity in this,
Yes, yes,
and what you're observing is in effect an act of dignity.
yes, absolutely.
And I suppose, in sort of saying to yourself, don't tell me and don't tell me, the significance of that, you're rejecting the voice that's trying to tell you because you think that something is more important than that rejection of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I've expressed that very well, but
Yes, no, I understand, David. Yes, that's right. That I was trying to get to the essence of what I was witnessing, and I understood that it was the sacred moment of him washing himself.
mm.
It wasn't just about poverty. It was beyond that in a sense.
Yeah, I don't think the poem really downplays poverty. So it's there, it's not ignored.
Yeah.
It's just not paramount to what you're saying in the poem. I imagine most of us in our comparatively privileged lives have either a conscious or not altogether conscious negativity about poverty. Is this poem attempting to take our blinkers off in regard to poetry in a sort of subtle way to show that poverty does not have to demean or diminish, that within poverty there may still be grace?
I think that's there, David. Absolutely. I mean, when I say, don't tell me this is a man released for a moment out of poverty, because he hasn't really been released out of his poverty, but he's found the dignity within his poverty. It doesn't have to, um, poverty doesn't have to kind of limit you internally. It might, put certain limitations on what you can do in life, but essentially, I think what's more vital is that you have a kind of, I don't know, a sense of your own dignity, your own sacredness, even within difficult circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, poverty doesn't preclude an inner richness, does it?
No, absolutely not. Um, and some people might think that it does.
Mm. You're going to read another poem, which is, I think, from a very similar sort of situation. Similar, was that a sequence of poems that you wrote about?
Uh, yes, David. Yes. I wrote some poems about my stay in India,
Mm.
which appeared in my second book. And this next one called The Dung Collector. So I lived with an Indian family for some months in Amritsar. Next door to the family was another household, and they had a cow. And every morning, a woman would come and rake the cow dung off the sort of shed floor, and shape them into patties, dung
Mm.
patties that she would then dry on the side of the building there. And again, I just thought there was such dignity in what she was doing. Western eyes might look at that particular job and think, oh, how awful, having to, handle cow dung or something like that. But no, again, I saw with the value of it, because of course, they need fuel.
Mm.
And yeah, and just again, just the very fact that she didn't seem to have any of those reactions that we might have.
Mm.
So I'll read the poem through. Dung Collector. Each morning she wipes the sweat that runs from under the red dupatta veiled across her face and lifts another load with a gasp. Soon she'll sit with her stupors of dung and hallow the flies. Soon she'll pray each stack into the day's chapatis, each new vat of dung into a tureen of dal to stir above the evening smoke. Then she'll work another hour or two raking the unbaked yet steaming dung from the mud. I've seen heifers given more freedom to wander the earth than this woman who carries another load to her wall, then chants with the traffic. She could almost be any woman humming at a task, moving a ladle through vichyssoise in a perfumed apartment off a sunny boulevard, watching light slip into a room like a spoon into ingredients for hollandaise sauce, while she contemplates the arrival of guests, the early yellowing of the alder leaves. Clearly, though, this is not about workmanship, not about having a thankful heart in a beautiful place, not about being a speck in the slurry of a rushing Punjabi street, or about a woman who must save herself by labour and prayers. It's about a woman who must live under the anus of a cow as if it were her star, who must slap dozens of discoloured moons onto the side of her house for an orange sun to bake, who hears the sighs of the world as her bracelets slip up and down her arms like the songs of insects in overflowing grass. About a woman who bends to scoop dung into a dish each morning with her arms and hands and looks straight into my eyes.
Yeah, so it's as I mentioned, it's very similar in a lot of ways to the the first poem you read, are these poems trying to show readers that the sacred is everywhere? That it resides within the most mundane and perhaps even distasteful tasks, and that there is a task for all of us to be attentive to this and to honor the sacred with our attention?
I think so, David. Yes, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think in this poem, the speaker um, is a little is just trying to work through the fact that this is not a pleasant task necessarily, but ultimately comes to uh, the conclusion that it is full of sacredness and full of reverence, and that it's the attitude that you bring to something that's the important thing, not the task itself. So I think I was trying to point out that she didn't think that this was a demeaning task. To
Mm,
her, this was her work, her daily chore, which had value. To the outsider, to someone like me, until I looked at it more closely,
mm.
initially I would have thought, oh, what a terrible life. But um, there is dignity in all sorts of things that we might dismiss, easily.
Have you ever wondered, Judith, how she might have understood your poem?
No, I haven't. As an interesting thought, David. Well, I hope that she would. Um, I hope that she would have liked the fact that she enabled me to understand something about what she was doing and how she approached that particular task.
Mm.
That she opened up something for me, some new way of understanding and seeing. So I hope that might have given her some joy.
Yeah, that she gave you something,
Yes, yes, yes,
and you took that something and turned it into a poem.
yes, that's right. Yes.
Um, I want to come back again to the subject of the poem and to the poet observing that subject and to the poem's attempt to bridge the distance between the two, because that's really what it's doing. Um, Acknowledging that distance, are you through poetry trying to enter the life of the dung collector and find and honor the intrinsic value of that life? Is that too big
Yes.
a statement to make?
No, I think that's correct, David. And I think, in a sense, what I'm also trying to do is to look at experiences or situations that can open up something in me. So it's a kind of two-way thing, if you like. So it's not just about giving what's been observed, the people that have been observed, some sense of dignity. It's about um, forcing myself to look at things perhaps more clearly, perhaps more empathetically,
Mm.
perhaps with more compassion. So yeah, it's a two-way thing.
In fact, well, you don't change her life at all. She
Yeah.
changes yours, and you might change the life of readers.
Yeah, who knows,
Who
David?
would?
But
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think ripples do go out, don't they?
We hope so.
You hope so.
Um, so I was interested, uh, in the first poem you wrote, "Don't Tell Me." In this poem you write, "I have seen heifers given more freedom to wander the earth than this woman, and yet you write, this is not about a woman who must save herself by labor and prayers." So the inference is that she does not see herself as shackled at all in any way. Um, and the last line, where she looks straight into my eyes, suggests that she sees value and honor in what she does. There's no shame, and that she's a vital cog in the wheel that keeps the world turning. And also that she sees herself as your equal.
Yes.
And that the poem is really about that equality in a way, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely. And also that I see her as my equal too. There's no hierarchy, one person's not better than the other. We just, engaged in different activities and different, you know, ways of being. And it's not that one's necessarily better than the other. Uh, it's just engagement. It's just being in the world, and that there's just because you're picking up dung doesn't mean that your value is any less than I don't know, a doctor or something. All these, as you were saying, jobs have their value, and each needs to be done. And it's often just, circumstance that will determine which job you get, things that are often out of your control.
But in saying that, you're basically discarding a whole bunch of inherited tropes about what has value. You're saying,
Yeah, yes, well,
because we're taught about hierarchies and who's better than whom and all the rest of it, and there has to be to get to the point where you see these things as equal, there has to be an unlearning.
yes, I think absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we live in a society that's, just based on hierarchies and what job's better than which other job and things like that. But again, it's what the person brings to the job, the attitude by which they do it. Chop water, carry wood,
Mm,
uh, that kind of thing. Yes, yeah, trying to look at those sort of structures and see behind them, I guess,
mm.
and to find what's valuable in what seems very very ordinary and mundane.
On one level, we're all equal in death. So why would we not all be equal in life? And yet there are all these structures that have been, centuries in the making, whether they are, political or economic or religious or other, that try and impose hierarchies where perhaps none should exist.
Yeah, it's very hard though, isn't it? Because people have different levels of what they're good at.
Mm,
Um, so in some senses, hierarchy is quite difficult to avoid. But I think we can make deliberate efforts, to try and work through some of these ideas behind the structures and just be more tolerant and more compassionate towards one another.
mm. I mean, the idea of equality is reinforced in the poem by the lines, "She could almost be any woman humming at a task, moving a ladle through Vichyssoise in a perfume department off a sunny boulevard." It's such a brilliantly contrasting image. I was wanting to know, how did you arrive at that particular contrasting image? Can you recall how many other images you might have tried out and rejected before settling on this one?
Oh, David,
It's a long time ago, but
I think that one came fairly quickly, actually. It was something about the spoon that came into my head, and and again, I wanted a kind of domestic situation
mm,
uh, as well, because the dung collector, that was a kind of domestic situation. She was collecting dung for the household to use as fuel so that they could cook and all that sort of thing. So I think the cooking association
mm,
must have been behind it, I would say. Can't
mm,
remember specifically now, but something along those lines, I would think, is how that was generated.
mm. Um, in the second half of the poem, the narrator asserts, "Clearly, though, this is not about," and then recites various things, and then later writes, "It's about," and recites other things. The confidence in these assertions of it is not about and what it is about actually troubled me a bit, Judith. There's an element of guesswork and presumption in these assertions. How can an observer truly know? It could easily not be and be about other things. So I was wondering, in making these assertions, are you not so much looking for the truth of the matter so much as trying to make a point that we should interrogate and question our assumptions about what things are about?
I think it was just me trying to understand it and again to try and get to uh, the essence of what I was observing. Uh, I mean, on the one hand, again, going back to the kind of material dimensions, she again was a poor woman.
Mm,
And I think I was trying to say again that you can't necessarily deny that, but when you look beneath the surface of that, there is something else going on. And again, it's the way that she was connected to her labor.
mm,
Uh, or I felt that in a way that she'd be connected to whatever she was doing, in a way that gave everything some sort of dignity. And maybe that's a bit idealistic. And maybe that's what I would want everyone to do, but of course they don't. Um, so maybe there's a little bit of sort of hopefulness or uh, I don't know, wishful thinking also in the poem, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Because poems, and you would know this, David, in the writing of poems during that process, things come up, things change.
They
Uh,
go elsewhere.
they go elsewhere, and you don't always know where you're going to end up. You don't always know what it is you think about something until you kind of sit down and write about it. Like I very rarely know what it is I'm going to be expressing when I sit down with a poem. I might just have a memory or a set of images in my
Mm.
head, but as to where they're going, sort of in terms of meaning or some kind of idea only occurs in the writing process.
Well, that's part of the mystery.
It's part of the mystery, that's right. Yes.
And sometimes the mystery remains even after the poem is completed and you don't fully understand what happened there.
Yes, yes,
There's the
sure.
poem.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely, yes.
All right. So the next one you're going to read is moving in a different direction.
Yes, the binoculars. I should add, by the way, that this is completely made up. Uh, Never knew anyone called Harvey Markham. My father was not a bird watcher, so it's a little kind of a fictional narrative, if you like. But I sort of hoped it might say something again about friendship and the connection that humans can have with each other and also with nature. The
I found,
binoculars.
Judith, I found uh, an article by Joe Dolce in which he said that you told him that it had been made up. And
Right.
I was doing some research trying to find out who the hell Harvey Markham was and came up with some other Harvey Markhams that nothing to do with the poem. Yes, I discovered that it was a fictional poem. We'll talk a bit about that later, but yes,
Okay.
it was.
Yes. The binoculars. When we heard the news that Harvey Markham had fallen to his death, my father and I were walking by the inlet. Ducks strung out in echelon had come in to dabble and dredge. We were watching them along with the rise and swirl, lift and spill, spin and glint of the spindrift blowing along the shore. Harvey was my father's oldest friend. For years they'd shared a love of seabirds. They'd go almost anywhere for a sighting. Harvey would always risk the difficult places, the top of a rocky crop, a ledge or bluff where he could watch the swooping and soaring of courting pairs of osprey, or see the brood inside an eagle's nest. Nearly every bird named in my father's notebooks Harvey had spotted first. A streaked shearwater, a great and least frigate bird, a white-faced storm petrel they'd seen almost as a single sighting one day off a headland as Harvey zeroed in upon a distant fleck, then into the crevices in the rocks. Whenever I thought of Harvey, I'd see his face locked to his binoculars as he swept the sky to track some speck to its point of vanishing. His fingers skillful as an optometrist's, adjusting the scope, bringing the cliffs in close, or lengthening his vision outwards, his hands always keeping his line of sight steady. After Harvey's death, my father locked those binoculars away in an airless display case along with a frigate bird he'd paid to have stuffed in the soaring position, its red throat pouch in full balloon display. Years later, I opened the cabinet. The bird had slipped its mount, and I wanted to set it right. But first I took out Harvey's field glasses. I levelled them to the back of the room and saw what looked to be the sky in mauve-grey sea mist patterns, full of flecks like the birds I could never bring to view. I tilted the glasses closer to the light and saw the dusty, spotted, buff-coloured shells of falcon eggs and what seemed to be the mottling on the breast of a grey goshawk. Then I remembered what decades ago my father had done. Grief had broken him, and for quite some time he seemed locked away, fixed to a lost field, trying to scan for all the old vignettes intruding at the edges. I saw him again clasping Harvey's binoculars between his knees, working the prisms and the light-gathering lenses he'd removed back into place, and slowly sealing into each intricate chamber as much as he could of Harvey's ashes.
Can you say something, Judith? You said that it's a completely fictional poem, about the genesis of this poem, where the idea for it came from, how the poem arrived?
I find that I'm very drawn to coastal landscapes, whether it's a beach or an inlet or a bay. For some reason, my imagination comes alive in those landscapes. So initially, I just started the poem with two people walking along the inlet, watching some birds, ducks strung out in echelon came in to dabble and dredge. Um, and then it just kind of took on a life of its own, I think, David. I don't know why I suddenly introduced this Harvey Markham, but I don't know, there must have been something in me that wanted to write something about loss and grief, I think. And sometimes giving those emotions a different setting or even a different story can help you delve into them in a way that, say, if I don't know, if I'd written a personal poem about loss and grief, I wouldn't have been able to reach. So somehow just making a story out of it helped. And also I have a fascination with birds, as most poets do. And so the birds were a very important part of it. I think once I got the idea that these two friends were bird watchers, then it was easy for me to bring a lot of the detail into the poem. I'd
Mm.
also many years ago tried to write a poem about an ornithologist who was on a cliff watching some birds and fell. So I could never get that poem to work, but obviously there are things in the binoculars that were in that initial poem, or at least, the sorts of some of the background. So that was playing into it too. So it's a poem I probably wanted to write for a long time, but couldn't make it work until I got this sort of friendship idea.
Mm.
Um, I'm fascinated with binoculars, actually, what they do to sight, and how they can bring the world up close and engage you with things that are in the distance. I think it's a sort of fascinating process to look at the world through binoculars.
How did you come up with the idea of having the ashes in there?
Ah,
Because that's I did not see that coming.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it was as much as a surprise to me as anyone else, David. I think once I got the idea of uh the the idea of bird feathers and eggs and things like that, it just eventually, I think, seemed to suggest itself. Who
Mm.
knows where things come from? I mean,
Yeah,
it's the mystery, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
The things just kind of come, don't they? That you have almost no control over, or they have a life of their own. which is really good because
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I would hate to know what it was I was going to write about before I sat down to write. I think
Yeah.
part of the pleasure of writing is that process of discovery and going on a journey and exploration.
Well, I've always thought of it as a bit of an archaeological dig.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, do you write a lot of fictional poems?
Hmm. I do a lot of fictional poems. I make up characters, I make up little stories. But what I hope is that they're emotionally true. And I do feel that even though the details in a lot of the poems are invented, that there's an emotional truthness to them, whether it's a poem about grief and loss or some other emotion. I have at some level experienced that, but just recast it into a different context, a different story. I find that I can get into the material, as I said a minute ago, into the material more readily if I have that sort of perspective of distance.
Mm.
I find it very difficult to, to write poems that are, you know, personal ones from the I point of view. I prefer to use a mask.
Yes, I'm going to ask you about that a bit later. Um, at the heart of this poem is the relationship between the narrator's father and his friend, Harvey Markham. And secondary to that is the relationship between the narrator and her father. So there's a couple of relationships going on. And those relationships are interwoven and mixed with memory. So the poem is a kind of a looking back. Even if it's fictional, it's a looking back. Is there an attempt in that looking back at finding resolution of sorts?
I think probably there is. I mean, I haven't really considered that, David, but I think the father putting the ashes of Harvey Markham into the binoculars was a way of trying to resolve his grief,
Mm.
um, and to kind of acknowledge the friendship. Um, I'm not sure whether the narrator finds resolution necessarily, because after all, they had forgotten initially what the father had done.
Mm.
Um, so that seemed to be a much more um, intimate thing between the father and the friend. Um, I think it probably is about trying to understand grief a bit and the things that we do to acknowledge the grief. And yeah, I think it's essentially about acknowledging grief and loss.
Because
Whether
here the grief was kind of hidden, wasn't it? I mean, the ashes in the
yeah,
binoculars,
yes,
kind
yes,
of a hidden
that's
grief,
right.
not out in the open.
No, but the 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 I guess the in the display case, there's the bird, so there's the frigate bird, and the binoculars are also in the display case. So in one sense, it's the grief is on display, even though the
Mm.
ashes are hidden in the binoculars.
Mm.
But I still think there's a display of the grief there. And also, I guess, from the father's point of view, the intimacy of putting the ashes into the binoculars,
Mm.
knowing that they're there, keeping them there, that sort of intimate connection, keeping that going.
Mm. I'm fascinated by how poets weave, it is a weaving, imagination, facts, emotional truths, and many other things into poems. This poem is about the legacy of a close and deep friendship and how grief impacts on that legacy. And you've mentioned that, you're hoping that it sort of arrives at some kind of emotional truth. Can you talk about the truth in this poem and how you have woven imaginings and other things into the poem in order to tease out the truth?
Ah, if I knew that, David, I'd be, I'd be able to sit down every day and write a poem. Look, I don't know. I mean, I guess after you've been writing, for some time, and I've been writing, for a very long time now, you learn things along the way that become more intuitive, I think, as you go on. You learn maybe what works for you and what doesn't.
Mm.
I know that when I'm writing a poem, I do like to try and put a lot of detail in because I think detail, imagery, those sorts of things are very convincing for a reader. So if I'm going to make something up, then I have to try and make that poem, read convincingly.
Mm.
And I think, and again, that's where the imagination comes in. I don't want to just write poems that are kind of recordings of what I've experienced. I think there needs to be some transformation that takes place in the poem, and usually that occurs through language, through the kind of metaphors and patterns of thinking that you set up. Uh, I don't know how all this stuff wove itself together. Sometimes poems work and sometimes they don't. I've got hundreds of poems that I've probably tried to do a similar thing and just haven't worked. So it was something about I think, the emotional content that I wanted to get across and just something about the narrative that all seemed to come together in a way that worked.
How can you tell, Judith, when a poem has worked and when it hasn't?
Oh, good question. Sometimes I can't tell after, and I need a fair bit of time to relook at something and to understand, no, this is not working. This is not strong enough. It's not holding together. Um, I don't know. There's some sort of resolution, I think, that feels right when a poem's working. It's as if all the elements do come together in some way. I always often feel that writing a poem is a bit like, solving some mathematical algebraic equation or something, that all the bits and pieces have to be right before you can get the answer. And I often feel that the answer is the end of the poem. And if the ending feels right, I think, then often I think, okay, this poem seems to be going in the right direction. But it takes me a long time to get an ending for a poem. For me, that's the trickiest part. And I'll often work very, very hard on the endings. Yeah, I wish I knew. I wish I could tell you, David, but uh, I don't know. It's just you got to trust too, I think. You got to trust the creative process and hope that it will take you somewhere. And it doesn't always, of course, because you can't manipulate it and you can't predict it and you can't use a formula.
No, no, no. Um, you talked about the endings to your poems, but what I've noticed is that you have very, very strong opening lines in each of the poems that you're reading today. Um, in this poem, combined with the title, the opening line introduces all the elements teased out in the poem. The binoculars, Harvey Markham, the narrator's father, the narrator herself. Clearly, you set yourself a task to begin with a really strong opening line. Can you say something about your opening lines and then the task you give yourself to write poems worthy of them?
Well, sometimes the line I end up with as the beginning might not be what I started with at all. Often, you have to work yourself into a poem, and often, you write a lot of scaffolding, and eventually you have to kick that away and find where the real beginning is. So, it's a constant process of restructuring, reordering, rethinking. I can't quite remember now, David, how I started this poem, but I don't think initially I had Harvey Markham. I think it was just the father and the speaker
Mm.
in the landscape. Um, and then I got the idea of having a kind of death, because that is it's an arresting kind of thing to happen. Yeah, so it's trial and error a lot. And as I said a minute ago, just sort of trusting in the process, not overthinking it while you're writing, because I think that can that can destroy what you're writing. So just going with it and seeing what comes about. Yeah, and as I said, I've got hundreds, probably thousands of poems that just never get anywhere. So it's probably a rarity, that they work. Um,
That is strangely consoling.
it's hard to just on that point. It's hard to know when to leave a poem alone too. I mean, I often I think keep working on something that's a dead end, and I think I've got to learn, to give up a bit sooner.
Yes, I'm guilty of that too, because from my perspective, there's an idea,
Okay.
all right, and I want the poem to express the idea, and the poem does express the idea, but it just doesn't do it in a way that sufficiently works. But the
Yeah.
idea is still good, and it deserves a poem. But you,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, that's
I know
right.
what you're talking about. Yeah.
Mm.
Um, the natural world and our interface with it is everywhere in your poetry. Um, and you've talked about, your love of birds, and in this poem, the focus is very strikingly on birds and the relationship that some of us have with them. What would you say are the roles of the natural world in your poetry? Just, very sort of small questions here.
Yeah. Well, I've always gained a lot of solace from the natural world. I was very, very shy as a child and didn't especially like, social situations. So I would find that I would go out into the back garden and just watch the ants or, or something like that. So the natural world has always been a place of fascination, definitely for me, and something that I find enriching. So I've always wanted to try and write about it and also the fact that it's so other, you know, it's kind of other and it kind of isn't other. And the relationships between the human and the natural world have always interested me, and also people's relationships with animals. I often write about animal cruelty and things like that. Um, yeah, so it's always been a fascination. I think it always will be. I've always written about animals, insects, birds. It's sort of inexhaustible, really. Yeah.
As your next poem will demonstrate.
Okay. So this is about the very annoying little insect, the mosquito. The mosquito riffs and plaints. I prefer the cicada's stroboscopic, glitzy oral brandishing and the bee's legato burr. Even the blowflies whir when heat keeps the pedal down. The cockatoo's pulley-driven clangs of wrecking ball metal against a sky amplified. The wind as it knocks and turns into ruin the slow percussive refrain of the moody midday rain. I prefer the digestive grumblings of an erupting city drain, a frog's slow glugs, bats' incessant chitter, the crickets like house slaves singing, even pigeons under the eaves doing an all-day funked-out coo. I prefer the damaged ringing of my inner ear and, yes, say it, everything turning tintinnabular than to hear this stylus-burdened insect pest mimicking a tiny current's hum and hiss, this long-nosed diva floating above my breath. Plump criminal, you idle above the cool pleasure of my skin. You hitch up your mouthparts, plot crimes above my pulse, steal from my cask of good deep red. Look, I know what you courier, and it isn't quinine. I know how you lie in gully traps, in pit latrines, at the edges of clear running streams. You love the horse trough, the water butt, puddles in unmade roads, brick pits, barrow pits. You love the dregs in rusted tins. Little aching creature, stuttering to the night like a tiny violin. You look like one of Liszt's hemi, demi, semiquavers scrawled across night's long stave. With you I count insomnia's digits. All your mal arias are buzzing in my blood. I prefer a storm's drumfire scud, an afternoon's cloud of slow distempered midges, or the sizzling obituaries of fruit flies above a compost, the loudest of Frank Zappa's riffs zapping anything but noise flying through my head. Mosquito, you sing into my ear as if it were your mosque, but I'm waiting for you with my aerosols around the back end of spring. I'm waiting, mosquito, for my hand to slap a message back, just once, loudly and quick as your electric dialect.
I want to applaud. I
Thanks,
want to
Dave.
applaud. I'm buzzing with questions about this poem, Judith. I want to ask you first about language and how you seek to deploy it in your poetry, because to me there are always linguistic surprises in your poems. Word combinations that are innovative and that treat language as malleable and flexible. And this poem is such a good example of that. So, how do you approach language in your poetry?
Well, I do try for richness of language. I'm interested in poems that have a rich kind of texture.
Mm.
Um, I'm interested in the way that repetition can work, and you've probably noticed in quite a few of my poems, I do have lots of repetition. In this one, I prefer, etc., etc. That's a kind of generating pulse, I think, trying to get the language moving. Um, as I said earlier, I'm really interested in detail, in imagery, in building kind of ornate linguistic structures. So poems take me a long time. All this requires, a lot of work. I don't know whether I can say more than that, but yeah, so it's a deliberate attempt to make the poems almost baroque in a way in their use of language at times,
Mm.
building, um, layering, just trying to uh, create sentences and stanzas that please my need for this sort of ornateness, if you like.
Yeah, one
My
eight's a great.
favorite, one of my favorite poets is Lucy Brock-Broido. I don't know if you know her work. She's incredibly embroidered and who works sort of a brocade, and I love what she does. Very rich kind of tapestry of all sorts of things. Um, so I've always liked poets like that. So I try and get that into my work if I can.
I think you can.
Sound is a big driver.
Yeah.
Um, I'll often work off sound rather than sense. There's something that Wallace Stevens said. He said when you're writing a poem, he said it's necessary to try and get the intellect off the poem almost successfully. And he said one of the best ways of doing this is through concentrating on the sound. And I've tried that myself, and I write a lot of poems that way. Just looking at the sounds I'm using, seeing where that leads me. Um, yeah, I find that a really good technique to follow.
Mm. I mean, the surprises for me are not just in the use of language, but in how often you bring in things out of left field. So, I mean, Frank Zappa is perfect for this poem, but it would never have occurred to me if I was writing the poem to draw him in. Um, Even though, you've got the word riffs in the title, so there's a clue there. How important is it for you to think laterally when you're writing poems and to expand the reach of poems by having a wide-ranging lens like this?
Oh, very important, David. That's what I aim for, really, is to have this sort of wide expanse of things coming into the poem. unexpected things. And often they come in through play, through puns or, just through wordplay. So just trying to open yourself up to, some of the things that language can do, I think helps me write. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of play, I think, in this poem.
That was going to be my next question, actually. I was like, I noticed, there are rhymes, there are half rhymes, there's internal rhymes, a whole lot of wordplay happening. And to me, reading it, none of it felt forced or out of place, which is always the risk, when you're doing that. So my first question is, did you have a lot of fun writing this? And secondly, how hard was it to write?
Uh, well, I started this poem probably about 10 years before I finished it. I wanted to write a poem about mosquitoes because they're a universal, we all have experience of mosquitoes, and most of the time we don't like them. But I couldn't get that one to work. Then I had another rethink. Um, and I guess the idea came to me that the most annoying thing really about a mosquito, for me anyway, is the sound. You get that buzz in your ear. It's not necessarily that they bite, but it's that annoying sound. And so I guess that just unleashed then a whole string of sound references that enabled me to get into the poem and pursue that level of layering and imagery. Um, it was hard to write, I think, but it was
Yeah,
also fun. It was also fun to write. And I think when a poem's working well, they are fun to write.
yeah.
They might be difficult and they might be challenging, but there's something about when a poem's coming together that feels really enjoyable.
And when you finish a poem like this, and particularly like this, because there's so much going on, and you read it back to yourself, do you ever say, yes?
Yes, I do. I do say yes. And then I look back and think, how on earth did I write that?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, um, you kind of look at what you're doing at the particular moment and you think, oh my God, this isn't working. But yeah, but often I think, I do start things and have to sort of leave them for years sometimes before I can get back to them or I can find a way into the subject matter.
Mm.
And you
You
don't always
mentioned,
know which ones that's going to happen to.
yeah, yeah. You mentioned before a little bit about intuition. Um, and I'm probably a poet who writes more intuitively than otherwise. But my sense is that you write very deliberately, very consciously, and that craft is paramount in the unfolding of your poems. Can you say something about the relationship between intuition and craft in your poetry?
Thank you. That's a good question, David. I do value craft. I value the aesthetics of a poem. I value um, poems that seem to cost the writer something to write them, whether that's in terms of, the techniques and the craft employed or something else. Uh, I don't like poems that just privilege content. I like to know that the poet has, really tried to work on the language and bring that language up to a level that makes it incredibly powerful and fresh. Um, Intuition, that's a hard one because sometimes intuition doesn't work, or your instincts don't work. But I think after you've been writing, for quite some time, you do learn things, and those things become uh, perhaps a little easier. Perhaps you can draw on them more readily when you're writing. I find these days that I've probably have less failures than I used to.
Mm.
And I think that's just due to the fact that I've been doing it for so long that, something's sunk in there and It's like, learning an instrument in a way. You can just sit down and play the piano when you know what you're doing. Um, yeah, but I focus very solidly on craft. Yeah.
Mm. This is a poem that seems to me to explore the possibility of poetry. And I kind of wish there was a sort of poem that, all those school kids who've been turned off poetry for life um, are exposed to, because they might have a different view if they were presented with something like this. Do you want to push boundaries in your poetry, or are you just trying to write the best poems you can?
I think the latter, David. I've never considered myself to be any kind of, boundary pusher. I work quite formally, really. I still use stanza forms, very particular about how I use the line. So I don't think I'm doing anything new.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, I just want to write the best poem I can.
Mm.
Absolutely.
And when you write a poem like this, um, how do you want them to impact on your readers? Do you get feedback? Have you had feedback on this poem? How do people receive poems like this?
Um, Generally well, I think. I've had people say that they really liked it, which is always nice to hear. Um, which is what you want. I mean, you want your poems to be enjoyed by others and that people might get something from it. But I very quickly move on um, because I think what's paramount always in my mind is the poem I'm working on now.
Mm.
And in some ways, what's happened in the past, it's nice to know they're there, but I'm more interested in, the here and now, what I'm trying to do at the moment. If you know what I mean, it's sort of these poems just sort of fade into the past after a while.
Yeah, and until you get asked to come on a podcast and read them again.
Yes.
Um, all right, so we're going to move from mosquitoes to wild bees.
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay, so this one's called Hymnal Dash Wild Bees, and it's to the memory of Martin Harrison, a really fine Australian poet. As the water scats over pebbles, as the creek thins and trickles, there's a sound that seems pirated from a flock of seed-gathering parrots and a muster of hot gospeling crows. Along the mud, spoonbills scribble, their bills as frenetic as compass needles trying to orienteer quick passage. It's the egrets I watch most, poised, quiet as Gilbertine nuns, who with naked feet seem about to step along a corridor and enter their prayer cells. I don't come here often. There are spiders, ticks, thick-bellied snakes, and toadstools as bloodless as the fingers of morticians' gloves. Once I saw a headless possum and a pit bull mauling a lizard it had clawed out from the dampness of a log. There are trails of bull ants talking chemically and incessantly to each other, bits of repeating code. And where the melaleucas leak tannin into the runnels, you'd swear it was a spill of beef's blood. But sometimes I like to come and notice how the spore cases of the bracken are like a hemming of brown wool, or to smell the leaf rot curated along the path by hard-working organisms. Mostly I come to watch bees fly around the high heat of their hive and swarm their weight towards the gum blossoms in a light sort of yellow. Today I see that the limb housing the hive has fallen, shattered. Some bees lie trapped in the sticky spill. Some bees will have fled with the queen. This hive, once a murmuring, blood-warm gourd, is silent, and I never see again the bees among the wildflowers, or see them busy in the depths among the stamens, moving from cup to cup, as though they were flames lighting candles. I'll never hear their lingering vibrato, a mind enamoured of its own music, getting right each thought's hum, bearing its bearing and its course. Bees, no longer alive or high in their hive, no longer making clear, elaborated nectar.
So you mentioned, Judith, that this poem was in memory of Martin Harrison. Is there a connection between Martin and this poem?
Yes, David, in the Bees, he had a selected poems called Wild Bees.
Right.
Um, and I was kind of, in a way, in my own mind, towards the end of the poem, when I bring in the bees, I was thinking of Martin and, um, the hive had fallen, the bees had gone, and I was thinking, Martin, he died, he's gone, his poems have gone. So
Mm.
in my own mind, there's that connection there. So I was trying, in a sense, just sort of fairly obliquely, I suppose, to honour his memory there.
Mm.
Um, I didn't start off with that intention. Um, Again, I think I was just initially writing a descriptive poem, and a lot of the details here are made up. I've not seen a pit bull uh, mauling a lizard, uh, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of the details are just kind of invented as well. Not all of them, but quite a few of them. And it wasn't really until I remembered that I had seen this hive that had fallen to the ground. It's near a nature walk near where I live, and there used to be this hive of bees up in the tall tree. And one day the branch came down and it was lying on the ground, and there were all these bees just sort of lying there in a kind of swarm on the ground. So it was that memory really that I think um, ended up driving the poem to be a poem about memory and loss. Um,
Mm. I mean, it's a lament, really, isn't it?
yes, it is. Yes,
And the religious overtones are evident in the title hymnal and in the
yes,
reference to hot gospeling crows and Gilbert's
yes,
nuns, prayer cells, flames lighting candles. Um, those overtones are juxtaposed with, vivid depictions of the natural world, of plant and animal life. Do you have any particular thought in mind in juxtaposing religious overtones with depictions of the natural world in this way?
I guess it's just a matter of trying to get into the poem uh, a range of responses to the natural world. Like, sometimes the natural world can be quite ugly and full of danger and threat and that sort of thing. Other times, the natural world is full of moments of peace and grace. So I was just trying to layer, I think, those differing aspects into the poem there. That not everything about nature is lovely. Not everything is wonderful, but it's just there. It just is. Um, and to be attentive to it all if one can. Um, yeah, again, just that need to, uh, and again in this poem, I wanted to make the language and the images quite rich.
Well, the poem invokes the sensory from a range of references to sound, to strong visual imagery, as is your wont, to the smell of leaf rot. So you've got, quite a few aspects of the senses there. Invoking the sensory seems to me to be an integral part of your poetics. Can you say something about the role of the sensory in your poetry and how important it is for you to give readers a sensory experience when they read your work?
Mm. Thanks, David. Yes, well, it's paramount, as you've noticed. It's I guess it's for me where the living charge comes from through the senses. What you see, what you hear, what you smell. The sensory world. the way it touches you, your way your senses engage with it, for me is very important, and it's a way for me to also to get the language operating very concretely. Um, a way also, I think, of drawing the reader into the poem, because I think readers do respond to sensory detail to a large degree. Um, so yeah, absolutely, it's what I aim for. It's what I use, what I how I build my poems. And I try to bring all the senses in, as you've noted there. Particularly sound, I think. Sound's become a very poignant sense for me in latter years. Yeah, a lot of my poems nowadays talk about the sounds of things.
Mm. You've mentioned that you shy away from the more personal poems. Um, in this and in all the poems that you're reading today, the I of the narrator is present. The narrator is never really the subject matter of the poem, so much as a vehicle for the poem's observations. Is that your preferred mode of writing, to have the narrator on the side of the stage rather than front and center?
It is, David. Yes, absolutely, as you've noticed. I just find myself being more comfortable there, I suppose. I kind of, I don't really want the poems to be about me so much, or my emotional life, or my struggles, my troubles, or um, I want to kind of express what I see, and the emotions to kind of come out through the imagery. Um, I'm not a confessional poet by any means. It's not that I don't like confessional poetry. I admire poets who can write about themselves with a great deal of ease. Sometimes I really wish I could, but it just doesn't happen for me.
Have
I
you
think
have you ever dabbled in that?
I've done probably my last book. There's some more poems from the personal point of view. But yeah, it's not a position I'm comfortable with. Um, Yeah, I like the mask. I like finding a speaker or a character or a fictional situation through which I can explore. I think
Okay.
I'm a very private person, and I think it comes back really, or harks back to the fact of my sort of almost pathological shyness as a
Mm.
child. And I think it's all, related to that particular sort of psychology.
Mm. All right. Have you got another poem for us?
I have one called The Cuttlefish, which, as I mentioned, I often write poems about animal cruelty. And this is something I witnessed, a couple of decades ago, perhaps even more. A fisherman had caught quite a large cuttlefish, and he sort of brought it up from the boat and put it on the cleaning table, and proceeded to sort of dismember it and cut it up. And it just, I've never forgotten it. The cuttlefish. When the fisherman sloshed the cuttlefish from a bucket onto the cleaning table, an alarm of pigments flushed across its skin. Then it discharged a cloud of greasy sepia ink just before the man stuck a knife into it, and its gills leaked green blood. He scooped out the glaucous eyes like galls of plant tissue, then held them impaled on the tip of his blade. The faint pink bone he tore away floated like a tiny surfboard before it washed onto grey sand. Pelicans ate the skin and entrails, gulls fought over the eyeballs. Watching, I reeled, nauseated, as if the day had suddenly passed through a light-splitting lens, changing everything into colour-coded horror. Not once did the man look up from the steel of the table, nor from his knives. I looked towards the lighthouse, a gleaming white pillar of unsplit light, orienting me back into ordinary daylight, though I could still smell the blood's verdigris tang, still see the displaced eyes, the pupils dark, wavy, two tildes, two static ripples, pale fruit dripping from the end of a knife.
So you said that this is something that you saw. Where was this?
This was in Kiama, David, just along down by the wharf there. I think it's changed a bit since I saw this incident. But that's where it was set. I've got the lighthouse there.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that was the setting.
So the cuttlefish. So I come from South Australia. We love our cuttlefish because they're the biggest spawning grounds in the world.
Right.
It's a remarkable creature. It's curious, very intelligent,
Yes.
able to control the 10 million color cells within its
Yes.
to quickly change color, pattern, and texture. Capable
Yes.
of, as you put it, an alarm of pigments. It's a great phrase. For the fisherman, though, it's about livelihood. So he is efficient and detached as he goes about his work. In a way, does that make him blind? What do you think the fisherman allows himself to see of the being before him?
I imagine that he sees, as you say, his livelihood, his income. Um, but I don't think that, I mean, I'm against slaughtering animals. Uh, um, yeah, I'm a kind of animal rights person, and I just don't think it's right to take the life of a creature. I just don't think we have that right um, to over their lives. I mean, they're entitled to live their lives. So I don't feel any sympathy for the fisherman. Um, Obviously, he's got to earn an income, but it's a kind of livelihood that uh, doesn't get my approval.
Yeah. So you've titled the poem "The Cuttlefish," and the cuttlefish is the subject of the poem, but the poem is not really so much about the cuttlefish, but a commentary about us and our multi-layered relationship to the living world around us, as evidenced by the contrasting emotional responses between the fisherman who has no emotional response, he's detached and indifferent, and the observing narrator who reels nauseated.
Yes, that's right. It's about my reaction, really, essentially. And yeah, and just as you were saying about cuttlefish, David, I mean, they're remarkable creatures, and it just seems very, that people don't really often consider the creatures that they kill for food to have any value other than just being as food, and I just don't think that's right.
Mm. The poem fittingly flits through a range of colours: sepia ink, green blood, pink bone, grey sand, white pillars. Was that the natural flow of the poem, or were you intentionally incorporating as many colours as you could into it?
Um, I worked quite hard on this. It wasn't until I realized how many colors I was using, then that became the kind of my key into it, if you like. So when I got down to um, changing everything into color-coded horror,
Mm,
that was where the poem started to really come together. I just saw um, the way that I was actually using color and how I could kind of bring it all together in that line, color-coded horror.
mm, mm,
Because that's what I was saying basically in listing those colours. These were the colours of the horror of what was going on. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. And so sometimes it's a matter, I think, of finding the key imagery, the imagery through which you can think the poem through. And that's what I love about metaphor and simile is that they do give you a means of thinking, of generating thought that you may not have gotten to had you just relied on, discursive or logical means.
mm,
I think metaphor is very much a method of thinking.
mm. there's a concentrated focus on light,
Yes.
particularly in two lines where the word light appears three times. You know, I look towards the lighthouse, a gleaming white pillar of unsplit light orienting me back into ordinary daylight.
Yes.
What is the significance of light in these lines and in the poem generally?
I think so. The light in much of the poem has been split. It's been split into colour. So the idea of light, white light is where all the colours are integrated again, and you just get ordinary daylight. So it was that sense that I needed that integration again. I needed to feel that the world was integrated again, not split into this colour-coded horror. So I think that's the function there of those lights.
Well, I love the phrase unsplit light. When I initially read the poem, I read unspilt light, which could also apply, but uh, unsplit means not cut apart or not cut open.
Yes,
So that was very intentional on your part to contrast that to what had happened to the cuttlefish. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Funny how one word can actually say so much.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's right. That's what the poem does so well, doesn't it? In poetry in general, just the weight of words.
Well, we try.
We try. Yes.
Okay, you've got. I'm just a little bit conscious of time. You've got two more poems for
Yes.
us.
Do you want to just do one, David?
No, no. Let's do two.
Okay. All right. This one's again set on the coast, the break wall. A few crabs are packed in the crevices of the break wall. Tiny flat landmines the herons and oyster catchers are decommissioning with their bills. Earlier, we watched soldier crabs walk the sand like a bright blue eyeball brigade. Now it's nearly dusk. Light is playing on a spill of diesel that has the colours and sheen of liquefied opal. You call my attention to an octopus small and flexible as a ballet slipper in the shallow water under the wharf. It senses us, turns bright red before taking on the grainy texture of a rock. I do not yet know how often this memory will recur, nor the image of the sea eagle suddenly dropping from an air current, as if every hold could be released as easily as a slipknot. I do not yet know that the cormorant on a pylon, hanging out its wings, standing perfectly still as if practicing for a life behind museum glass, mounted, stuffed, locked in an eternal vacuum, will become another symbol of your absence. I watch a pelican's long, fricative skim while you walk ahead along the boards to where some youths are fishing. Their reels, as they wind in their lines, clatter like coins on a table rattling out of their spin. You're lost for a while to the distance where the jetty ends, misted by spray. Sharp-mouthed gulls fly in, noisy, keen, insistent, bargaining for something along the seawall. We do not yet know that this is where we'll scatter your ashes, disperse them across the harbour to float into the ocean like handfuls of oyster grit, the pale leavings of seabirds.
I feel like I'm going to have to put fricative in a poem somewhere now. That's a good word. Um, you were talking a little bit before about a metaphor. Um, is there a significance in the title of the poem, Break Wall, and the reference to the break wall in the first line? Is that more than just a description of a physical wall? Does it operate metaphorically as well?
Hadn't thought of that, to be honest, David. So it wasn't intentionally to be sort of metaphorical. But I suppose one could read that, the break wall, being like a buffer in a sense between a bay or a harbour and the ocean.
And also the end of a life.
The end of a life, yes, 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 yes. So I think that's certainly there in the poem, although, but sometimes things happen unconsciously, don't they? As
Yeah, absolutely. I
we've
mean,
been
I love it when
saying.
people read poems to me and find things in them that I didn't intend.
That's right. I like that too.
Now, you've talked about how important detail is for you in your poems, and this poem is packed with detail. But it's a fine balancing act, isn't it, to get so much detail in a poem without overdoing it.
Yeah.
As a reader, I get so much delight in the imaginative play between detail and language in your poems that they never feel overdone with detail. But can you say something about how you navigate what to put in your poems and what to leave out?
Yes. Well, often when I'm writing, it is a matter of editing things out that, I do put in a huge amount of detail often. And it's a good question. Well, what do you leave in? What do you leave out? I guess after a while, and perhaps this is where the intuition comes in again, I think you just know when your poem's being a bit top heavy with detail or something, or that the detail is not contributing to the emotional content of the poem. So I would look for things like that, whether the detail's just padding, or becoming a bit gratuitous. Um, yeah, so again, it's trial and error, I think, just finding out what's working, what isn't working, looking deeply into the poem, uh, seeing what can be chucked away. This is a poem that's sort of half fabricated, half real. The kind of details in the poem are a kind of amalgam of different things that I've seen in different places.
Mm,
The scattering of the ashes is a true occurrence, but it didn't actually happen in this setting.
mm,
Um, but once I'd gotten onto the detail of the octopus, then that set my mind in motion towards what the poem is about, which is about, again, about grief and loss. Because
mm,
I was with this person who's since died, and we saw this octopus. So I didn't know this was going to happen again. The mind just kind of has its own um, agenda, I think. But once that detail of the octopus came back into my mind, then I knew the sort of emotional core of the poem.
mm. Do you find that your first drafts are longer and fuller with detail, and that you do have to cut them back often?
Yes, I think so. I do many, many drafts. So the first draft might just be a few lines. Draft 50 might be half a page. Draft 100 might be 2 pages, and the end product might be, three-quarters of a page or something. So absolutely. I mean, I'm just always shifting things around, cutting out, putting in. Yeah, it seems an endless process sometimes. But
So
but I,
you,
I like that sense of work. Uh, I like because it's a kind of sense of vocation, I think. Yeah, I like the fact that poems take me a lot of work because
mm.
it makes me feel that they might be a bit more worthwhile or something. I don't know. I very rarely write a poem straight out or, with minimum effort.
So
Very,
you'd really do 100 drafts?
oh, more sometimes. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Wow, that's a lot. I've
Yep.
heard of 20, 30, 40, but 100. Yeah. Do you keep them all?
I used to keep them all, David, but I used to store them in my office at the university. And when I decided to retire, I thought, I can't bring these home. There's no space. So I threw them all out, which was very liberating. Uh, I've got all the drafts for my poems for my latest book, but I'll eventually throw those out too.
I'm struck also by how when I read your poems, I see them. We've talked about imagery. The visual imagery of lines like a spill of diesel that has the colors and sheen of liquefied opal is so precise and rich and vivid that the image springs fully formed into my head. For that to work as it does, each word has to be just right. You've said you you can do 100 drafts. How much work do you put into crafting your visual images? And what is your process to get the lines to say precisely what you want them to say?
Well, some lines come out quite easily, others I have to work on them. And again, sound helps me a great deal. I know they're full of visual imagery, but there's something about working with sound that does take my mind off the poem enough to let the image find itself. I have a very strong visual sense, so
Mm.
I notice things visually about the world, really readily,
Mm.
and I can recall these details, quite quickly. So coming up with the visual details is not really the problem for me. What becomes the problem is finding the context, the emotional context to put these visual details into.
Mm.
So I don't want the poem just to be descriptive. I want it to be more transformative than that. So the really hard work for me comes in finding, as I said, the kind of context, the meaning of all these visual details that I'm recalling or creating.
Mm.
And that's why I think a lot of my poems fail because I'm unable to find that way of transforming the material, the details into something that has more weight.
Mm. Um, there's a large array of teeming life in this poem: crabs, herons, oyster catchers, soldier crabs, octopus, seagull, cormorant, pelican, sharp-mouthed gulls. In stark contrast, if you like, to the absence of someone whose ashes are to be scattered. Is that contrast there to highlight the sanctity of life?
I suppose, in a way, it's also the idea that someone's died, but life still goes on. The
Mm.
world is still full of creatures doing their thing and
Mm.
people doing their thing. So the kind of the richness of what's around us never ceases, um, even though
Yeah.
we've lost someone. It is a contrast, isn't it? The loss and the multitude of life forms. It's what life is.
Mm. Would it be too much to say, Judith, that your poems, as exemplified by this one, are arguing that everything is sacred? Every life, human and other, every action, however lowly, every memory?
I don't think that's too much of a stretch, David. I think that's how I feel about things, generally speaking. That every life form, every bird, every little crab has its place and its worth, its value. Yeah.
Mm. All righty. Have you got one more for us?
I've got one more, and again, it's a poem set by the water. Okay, this is a poem in which I wrote where sound was very important in the composition. It's called Pepper Tree Bay. It's lovely to linger here along the dock, to watch stingrays glide among the pylons, to linger here and see the slanted ease of yachts, to hear their keels lisp, to see wisps of spray swirl up, to linger along the shore and see rowers round their oars in strict rapport with the calls of a cox, to watch the light shoal and the wash scroll, and wade in shallows like a pale-legged bird, sand churning lightly in the waves, terns flying above the peridot green where water deepens, to watch dogs on sniffing duty scribble their noses over paean-coded messages, and see a child make bucket sandcastles tasselled with seaweed, a row of fez hats, and walk near rocks back to the jetty where fishermen cast out with a nylon swish, hoping no line will languish, no hook snag under rock, to watch jellyfish rise to the bay's surface like scuba divers' bubbles, pylons chunky with oyster shells, where a little bird twitters chinchintry from its nest under the slats, to feel that the hours have the rocking emptiness of a long canoe, so I can relax and feel grateful for the confederacies of luck and circumstance that bring me here. And today I might spy a seahorse drifting in the seagrass with the upright stance of a treble clef, or the stately flight of black cockatoos, their cries like the squeaking hinges of an oak door closing in a draughty church. To walk near the Celadon pale shallows again, where I'll feel my thoughts drift on an undertow into an expanse where they almost disappear, and give thanks again to the profulent music of the waves, for all the ways that light exalts the world, for my eyes and brain changing wavelengths into colour, the pearly pinks of the shells, the periwinkle's indigo and mauve, the sky's methylene blue. That's
So
the
you
only
mentioned,
one I've written that's all one sentence.
well, I was going to talk about that in a minute, but before we get there, you talked about the sort of sound aspect of the poem. I mean, um, they're very subtle rhymes and half rhymes throughout. They don't sort of they don't jump out at you, but there's a kind of musicality when you read it. Is that what you're aiming for?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it was very much driven by, trying to repeat certain vowel sounds and consonant sounds. Yeah, and to get that sort of movement, that sonic movement happening in the poem, which I think was one of the reasons why I wrote it as all one sentence, just to generate movement it's a kind of, again, it's a sort of almost pile up of visual imagery. But I was hoping or planning that the music and the repeated sounds would, I don't know, just kind of push the reader through all this detail.
Mm. The word linger appears three times in the opening lines. I feel as if lingering is something that many of us in the chaos of modern life have forgotten how to do. Are you meaning here to remind us how important it is to stop, linger, pay attention, and how it is only by paying attention that we can move toward or into the sacred?
Lovely, lovely statement, David. Thank you. Yes, definitely. And I think that's what poetry does very often, is to tell us to stop and look, take the time out, and don't rush. That there's so much to be appreciated and observed, but you have to stop and look in order to do that. Again, yes, about appreciating the sacred moments.
This podcast is a bit of a hiatus for me because I was rushing beforehand and I'll be rushing afterwards, so I'm enjoying the moment. You mentioned that it's a one sentence poem, one long sentence. It reads to me like a deep breath, like a river, like something that flows in a fluid, unhurried, meandering way, so that you could say the poem lingers in itself. Was that part of what you had in mind?
I think so. Again, it's not as conscious as that, but certainly during the process of the writing, I did feel that I was writing a poem that was quite slow in a way,
Mm.
and very dependent on a kind of rhythm that I was setting up. And I think that's probably what came first, to be honest, was the rhythm and the rhymes. It's lovely to linger here along the dock, to watch stingrays glide among the pylons, etc., etc. So that fairly slow paced rhythm was very important, I think, for the poem. Yeah, so yeah, I think you're right there, David.
Yeah, I mean, it has a gentleness to it, which to me suggests like a slow moving river of some sort. But
Yeah, it's sort of someone just taking in their environment and watching the details, watching the things before their eyes, just taking them in and listing them, and really, and also the appreciation. When I get down to uh, something about give thanks again to the profligate movement, music of the waves, and for all the ways that light exalts the world. So just trying to be appreciative of what's before me, and to be appreciative of perception and looking, being observant.
Mm. Oh, that comes through very clearly to me. There are recurrent motifs throughout your poems that we've talked about a bit today, references to water, light, bird life, marine life, for example. What makes you gravitate repeatedly back to these motifs? Are they inspirations or touchstones, or is it just, as this poem suggests, that it is lovely to linger amongst them?
A bit of all that, I think. David. I mean, the sea and water is endlessly fascinating because it's moving all the time. There's never the same scene once. The water moves, the colors are different. So I like that sort of dynamic, and also the fact that there's two completely different elements meeting each other, the water and the land. It's always fascinated me, that sort of sense of where these two elements meet. And it's just the beauty of it too, I think, is a big driving factor for me. The beauty of landscapes and waterways in particular have always drawn my imagination. And there's a lot happening on waterways, so there's a lot that you can draw on. Lots of
Mm,
detail, bird life, people, boats,
yeah.
light. It's beautiful.
I mean, I know Anne Kellis is quite fixated on clouds and how that's
Right.
ever changing. Do clouds and skies come into your poetry a bit too?
A little bit, but certainly not as much as water. Yeah. I mean, I love clouds and skies too, and I can see the fascination with them, but no, my sort of gaze is not quite that high.
I feel as if your poems inhabit a moment and try to not just pay attention to and appreciate the moment, but to see it in all its beauty and richness and complexity. And specifically in this poem, which is why it's such a wonderful poem for us to finish on today, to remember to feel blessed by it, to, as you put it, relax and feel grateful for the confederacies of luck and circumstances that bring me here. Can you say something about gratitude and the relationship of your poetry to it?
Lovely, lovely question, David. Thank you. I've always felt very grateful to have a passion in life, which has been poetry. Um, so I am in a state of gratitude about that, and I guess I try and bring that into my poems, and into the world that I look at, and to be aware of my good fortune, and to try and express some of that in the poems. I'm extremely delighted that I can write a poem, or I've learned how to write a poem, I think is probably more of the way to put it. And that I want to kind of share that feeling with other readers, with readers. I want to um, create a sense of wonder about the world, that sense of sacredness about uh, the world and what's in it, and how special our human imagination and human sensibility can be.
Do you keep a gratitude journal like some people do? Or do you think your poetry is your gratitude journal?
I don't keep a journal, but I'm consciously saying to myself, "Oh, I'm so grateful for this. I'm so grateful for that," and it's a lovely thing to do. I think everyone should do it because it opens you up to really what is good about your own life and life in general.
Hmm. Both your theme and your poems suggest to me that you are steeped in not just writing poetry, but in seeing the world through a poet's eyes, in living a poetic life. How did you find your way to poetry and a poetic life? And what would life be like for you if you didn't have poetry in it?
I can't imagine what it would be like without having poetry in it, David. I just can't imagine a life like that because it's just been, core and central to my life, and everything I have really has sprung from it. Well, my friendships, my job, my how I spend my waking hours, even met my husband through poetry. So again, that's why I'm so grateful that I have it in my life because it's given me so much. I came to it, I always, as a kid, I always valued books and writing and reading. I always thought that that was a special activity. And I used to write a lot of poems when I was about 8 years old. I was very shy, as I said, as a child, and I think I found writing a way of being able to speak in a situation that was safe. So I wasn't in a crowd of people in which would have just terrified me.
Mm.
So writing was a way of just dealing with thoughts and emotions that was more difficult for me to deal with, socially. And so it became sort of, I guess, a habit or um, I found it very useful. And then I started to read poetry, and I just loved it. I just thought, oh, really like to try and write some of this. And yeah, so that's where it all began, back in my sort of when I was about 17 or so.
Wonderful. So, do you think in the beginning it was kind of like a refuge?
I think so, definitely. I mean, I had no idea how to write a poem or, how even to begin to think poetically or, what was required. It was certainly a refuge and just, sort of catharsis that a lot of adolescents go through, I think. But then I fell in love with language and I realized, okay, if I want to do this thing, I've got to learn how to actually write,
Mm.
how to put words together in some sort of interesting, resonant way.
I think you've managed to do that quite well, Judith.
Oh, thanks, David. That's
Um, Thank you so much
thank you.
for sharing these wonderful poems and exploring your experiences, thoughts, and insights on the theme of how poetry summons us into the sacred.
Thank you.
Details of Judith's books and where to get them will be posted with this podcast, so please look out for them. Next up on Poets Corner will be Justin Lowe on the theme of nostalgia. See you then.
Thank you, David.